In this video, we are going to start our discussion on Chapter 37, which is about fiscal policy. As we often do, we're going to just go ahead and start with a definition. So, what is fiscal policy? All right, so fiscal policy is the federal government's policy on taxes, spending, and borrowing. All right. So, just like with monetary policy, what fiscal policy is designed to do is to affect the aggregate demand to help kind of get the economy out of a depression or manipulate the macroeconomy. Some differences. One, with fiscal policy, we're really going to always be looking at fiscal policy increasing aggregate demand. The reason why probably might become clearer in just a second. And also, even though we say it's the policy on taxes, spending, and borrowing, really in this chapter we're really going to focus on spending. We'll mention taxes a little bit. We might mention borrowing, but we're really going to be focusing on the spending aspect, right? And really the taxes and the spending, if you think about how would you go about increasing the aggregate demand using those two things, well, that's all going to be done through our velocity of money growth rate, right? We can change or make changes to those consumption spending or those spending growth rates, right? Our consumption, our investment, government, so on and so forth. Right? With spending, it's kind of obvious. If we increase government spending, that's going to be an increase in the government spending growth rate. That's going to increase the velocity of money growth rate, and that is going to increase aggregate demand. Right? So spend more to increase aggregate demand. Right? Taxes. To increase aggregate demand with taxes, the government would need to lower taxes. If the government lowers taxes, then consumption spending, the consumption spending growth rate will increase because consumers now have more money to spend, and that's going to increase the velocity of money growth rate and therefore the aggregate demand. All right. So those are the ways that we would see kind of fiscal policy being enacted, at least in an expansionary role, right? And nobody likes getting taxed more. Nobody wants higher taxes, and a lot of people like having money spent, right, on either on them directly or benefiting from the money that is spent by the government, right? So it's very unlikely that, you know, I've heard of taxes going up. I've very rarely heard of taxes going down or going away. It doesn't happen super often. And spending, very few politicians are out there wanting to cut spending, or at least if they are, they're wanting to cut other people's spending and not their own, not their constituents, right? You're not going to get reelected. That's what politicians, their primary goal is to get reelected. So you got to keep people happy, and keeping taxes low and spending more is one way to do that, although it's also not a very sustainable system, right? But again, really only going to be looking at this from an expansionary standpoint, and we will be focusing most heavily on spending. All right, next we're going to look at the question, why/how does fiscal policy work? So how is this going to happen? All right, we know that real output, I guess I can underline that, comes from the real factors of production. So our capital, both human and physical, right? Natural resources, technological level, so on and so forth, those real factors of production. Right, spending, right, increasing spending does not change any of those. You know, if I spend more money, that does not affect the amount of capital in the economy, the amount of labor in the economy, the amount of any of that kind of stuff, right? Me just spending money does not increase those, right, by itself. So, you know, why should spending increase, right, or change real output, right? So when the economy is at full employment, spending, government spending specifically, that's what we're talking about, but just also spending in general, spending will not appreciably increase output, right? So that's when it's not going to be very effective. But let's kind of consider a hypothetical. Let's say that the government is going to build a dam, right? They want to increase their spending, so they say we're going to build a dam. Right? Well, building a dam requires a lot of stuff, right? And it requires a lot of workers, it requires a lot of resources, inputs, right? So a lot of goods and services are going to have to be produced in order to make this dam. Right, so if the economy is fully employed, so, you know, all of our resources are being used efficiently, everyone that wants to work is working, so on and so forth, then the output would not change due to this increase in government spending. Right? The reason why is what's known as crowding out. All right, so crowding out is the decrease in private spending that occurs when government spending increases. Right, and if the economy is fully employed, once again, all of this private spending, right, or that government spending, that increase in government spending is going to crowd out the full amount that it is, right? So if you have $100 million worth of government spending, right, it's going to push out $100 million worth of private spending. All right, that is essentially what crowding out is, right? Because if the government's going to build this dam, they have to hire workers. Well, if everyone's already employed, where are they getting those workers from, right? They're having to pull them from other places, right? Where is the government going to get all the concrete, all the steel, right? All the other things. I don't really know that much about dams. I know that they've got concrete and steel, though. That's pretty standard, right? But where are they going to get all that materials, right? If all of our resources are being used efficiently, then those resources have to come from somewhere else, right? So maybe someone is trying to build an office building, right? And you need those same products, right? Well, maybe now when the government comes in, the steel and the concrete that would have gone to that office building is now going to the dam. So we see that crowding out. Right? However, if the economy is not fully employed, so we have unemployed workers, all right, we've got resources that are just, you know, machinery that's sitting idle, that's not being used, right, office space that isn't being used, kind of so on and so forth, right, resources that are unemployed, right, then increases in government spending do not necessarily crowd out private spending, right? It can, but it's less likely to. Right? So when I say it can, let's explain that a little bit. Right? So if the the resources, right, the labor and the resources needed to construct a dam, right, are unemployed, right, then there will be no crowding out. Right? However, if the government tries to increase spending in a sector where there is full employment, right, so if kind of these, where you get these dam builders, right, and the resources, if those were already being employed, then increases in government spending would still crowd out, right? But if we have unemployed kind of construction workers and unemployed resources, then we can have we can see no decrease in private spending, right? So no crowding out, right? And that does kind of fall on a range, which we'll talk about in a future video. All right, so not only can crowding out not only can the increase in government spending not crowd out the private spending, right, it can actually also increase the amount of private spending. Right? This is known as the multiplier effect. So the multiplier effect is the additional increase in spending, I will say specifically private spending, caused by the initial increase in government spending. All right, so in the next video, we're going to look at the graphical part of this, but for now, let's just talk about how this happens, right? So how does increasing government spending lead to an increase in private spending? Right? Well, the idea here is that when the government decides to build this dam, right, they bring in these workers, they bring in these materials, right? Well, they're not just kind of increasing spending by hiring these workers, right? Or, well, let me rephrase that. So by hiring these workers that were previously unemployed, right, they now have higher incomes, right? So their spending is going to increase. So they're spending on, you know, lunch at the local diner, right? They're spending on just really anything else, right? So whatever they spend their money on, that's going back, that's increasing private spending, because that wouldn't have occurred without the government spending, right? Similar, and then, if they're increasing their spender, we'll just go with the diner because that's really the only example I gave, right? But they go to that diner, then the people working at that diner, right, see their income rise, or at least the owners maybe see they might hire more staff, all right? So then kind of private spending continues to increase. On the other side of that, with the resources, if the government is buying resources that were previously unused, right, or kind of underused, however you want to think about it, well, now the person that is providing those resources is also making more money, has also got a higher income. They're going to increase their spending, right, so on and so forth. So that is what the multiplier effect is about, right? The government has an initial amount of spending, right, and then that spending trickles through whoever they spent it on, right? Trickles down through the worker, right, who's now got a higher income, is going to go buy more stuff, right? Trickles down through the person who works at the, steel mill or the concrete place. I don't really know how / where you make concrete, right? But their wages increase, and they then increase their consumption, right? So that's what the multiplier effect is. Like I said, in the next video, we will look at the graphical side of this, so kind of show the multiplier effect graphically, and then probably do something else, but we'll see how long it is, all right? But that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.